"Where's the ATM card?" "Let me handle it," Donald said to me as I'd battled cancer and endured a hospital stay. His triumphant smirk hinted at sinister intentions now that he possessed the ATM card. "Just so you know, there's $500,000 in there." "Handle it well," I informed him, trusting him not just as my husband, but also as a part of my carefully laid plan. I disclosed the ATM card's location, aware of the risks but determined to turn the tables. When I returned home, hoping to retrieve some belongings, I found a divorce application on the table, confirming my suspicions. The ATM card was gone. The operation successful. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a hopeless situation, but for me, it was just the beginning of my revenge. I'm Emily, a housewife in my 40s. Initially, Donald and I had a problem-free marriage, but it all soured due to Donald's true nature, a deception that started 2 months into our marriage. He masqueraded as a kind, caring husband, but revealed the belief that a wife must always prioritize her husband, underpinning his terrible personality. Donald constantly subjected me to harsh words, believing a wife should be subordinate. "You should always listen to what your husband says," was his mantra. Failure to fulfill his whims would prompt cruel remarks like, "Aren't you capable of listening to your husband? You're a failure as a wife." His demands extended to household chores, insisting on washing his clothes separately and having his room cleaned first, no matter how unreasonable. Even meals were subject to his unpredictable moods. "A wife's job is to serve what her husband wants to eat," he'd say, rejecting even his favorite dishes if they didn't suit his fancy. It was unreasonable. Yes, I am Donald's wife, but that doesn't make me omniscient or capable of reading his mind. If he didn't want to eat something because he wasn't in the mood, he could have simply told me beforehand what he wanted. But Donald never did that, making it increasingly difficult to cater to his whims. I was honestly fed up with his childlike tantrums. It became unbearable. Yet I knew I couldn't ignore his demands completely because each mistake I made worsened the atmosphere at home and further deteriorated our relationship. Living under such forced conditions was taking its toll. While doing household chores, I lost consciousness, collapsing with a loud noise that alerted a concerned neighbor. They contacted the building manager, who found me and called an ambulance. Taken to the hospital and regaining consciousness, I was immediately admitted for tests. My wishful thinking, hoping they wouldn't find anything wrong, was shattered when I was diagnosed with cancer. Whether it was caused by stress or not, I experienced severe dizziness that left me unable to stand. A nurse had to support me as I sat down. Suddenly, the doctor advised me to contact family members. I tried reaching out to my parents' home, but my mother had passed away a few years ago, and my father needed care, living with my brother and his wife 3 hours away by plane. It was impossible for them to come quickly. I called Donald, but only reached his voicemail. Leaving a message, I realized he had turned off notifications for messages from me, likely meaning he wouldn't notice it promptly. I could have gone to retrieve my belongings myself, but the doctor advised against it, so I reluctantly gave up on that idea. Hours later, Donald finally contacted me with a brief message. "I'll come to the hospital tomorrow. Wait for me." His message lacked any concern for my condition, leaving me uncertain if he would even bring my necessities. His indifference felt like a heavy burden. Earlier, I had explicitly asked Donald to bring my belongings that day. I urgently needed a change of clothes and toiletries left at home. Despite my repeated messages, there was no response. After hours of distress, Donald finally read my messages and bluntly replied, "Shut up and be quiet." Considering my urgent need due to being hospitalized for cancer, his response was shockingly disappointing. Honestly, I hadn't expected much from Donald to begin with. True to form, he didn't show up at the hospital that day. I tried to be realistic, but a part of me couldn't let go of hope, making my first day in the hospital even more difficult. The nurses sympathized with me, which only added to my emotional pain. The next day, around noon, just as promised, Donald showed up casually. He remarked, "You look healthier than I thought. I expected you to be more frail." His comment infuriated me. "Just put down the bags and leave," I said angrily, tossing my head. Donald responded, "What bags?" My frustration boiled over. Wasn't he supposed to bring my things? Unable to contain my anger, I glared at him. "What's that look for?" He snapped back, clearly annoyed. His unreasonable behavior pushed me to my limit, but I tried to stay calm. "Then why are you here if you didn't bring my things?" "There's no point." "I had another errand," Donald replied in a confused tone to my angry question. "Another errand? What is it?" I pressed, impatiently exhausted from anxiety and sleep deprivation. Donald hesitated, as if debating whether to say something. "If you have something to say it now," I urged him. Finally, with a laugh, Donald revealed his true intention. "Where's the ATM card? Let me manage it. Trust me." His request suddenly made sense. He had come to take control of the ATM card, aiming to seize our savings for his own use. His self-centeredness, even in this situation, left me seething deeply. Yet Donald appeared unfazed, smiling as if nothing else mattered. Unable to tolerate his behavior any longer, I decided to act. "There's $500,000. Please take care of it," I told him firmly. Donald's reaction was a mix of surprise and delight. To provide context, both Donald and I had been ordinary office workers before marriage, never earning a fortune. So where did this wealth come from? The answer: stocks. I had started investing after becoming a housewife, following a friend's suggestion. While managing household responsibilities, I recently made a significant profit in the stock market. Initially intending to keep this $500,000 secret, fearing Donald's selfish actions if he knew about it, my desire for revenge drove me to reveal its existence. Donald's reaction to the unexpectedly large amount confirmed my suspicions. Smiling gently at him, I said, "The ATM card is in the third drawer of the shelf. You may use it." Donald seemed dumbstruck, but quickly regained his composure. "Understood," he replied energetically. It appeared he had fallen perfectly into the trap. "I'll leave the rest to you," I said as he briskly left the room, unaware of the obvious trap. Donald seemed convinced everything was going according to his plan. However, withdrawing such a large sum wouldn't be easy. Fortunately, it was a holiday, and the bank's counters were closed. Donald, occupied with work the next day, wouldn't likely withdraw the money until the evening, giving me enough time to execute my revenge plan. After discussing it with my doctor, I was granted permission to leave the hospital briefly, and tomorrow my revenge would unfold. Unable to wait until then, I decided to return home to retrieve my belongings. This was merely a pretext. My real goal lay elsewhere. Despite missing home dearly, even for just a day, I knew Donald would be at work, leaving the house empty. Upon entering, I spotted two papers on the living room table: a divorce application and a hastily written letter. "Sorry for the rush, but let's get divorced. Please write and submit the divorce application," the letter read. With caution, I checked the shelf and confirmed my suspicion. The ATM card was gone. Donald had taken it. Ordinarily, one might feel dismayed at such a significant sum being stolen, but I couldn't help but smile. "Operation successful" slipped out of my lips. If Donald had been present, he would have been furious, wondering what I meant. First, I filled out the divorce application. Then I gathered the essentials needed for my hospital stay and left the house we had shared for so many years. Of course, I submitted the divorce application on my way out, severing all ties with him. Back at the hospital, I prepared for the challenges ahead, discussing various matters with my doctor. Later, while relaxing in my hospital room, I noticed several missed calls on my phone, all from Donald. He had also sent messages asking how to withdraw the money or something similar. Not wanting to disturb my roommate, I moved to the common area where phone calls were allowed and returned Donald's call. Finally, I can't withdraw the money. Please tell me how to do it. Donald's voice sounded more frantic than I had imagined. Clearly, he needed the $500,000 immediately for some urgent reason, but I felt no obligation to help him. If you can't withdraw it, just give up. I replied coldly, my distress evident in my tone. Don't be so harsh. We were husband and wife, after all. Maybe we should help each other out, Donald pleaded. What nonsense! About being husband and wife, about helping each other, I retorted sharply. Donald's actions betrayed nothing noble. He was driven purely by greed. There was no way I would entertain Donald's appeal to sentiment. Are you having trouble withdrawing the money? I asked, trying to maintain some semblance of detachment. Yes, I urgently need the $500,000. Please help me. Donald's voice trembled with desperation. It was the weakest I had ever heard him. The thought of Donald being so cornered almost made me laugh, but I decided to confront him with a harsh reality. The method is correct, but the ATM card you have now won't work anymore, I stated bluntly. Donald's voice rose in disbelief. What do you mean? Normally an ATM card should work. It's true, an ATM card should work, but the one you have is now useless, I informed him firmly. Why? Because I filed the theft report earlier today. The ATM card is just a piece of paper now, useless to you, I declared calmly. Silence followed on Donald's end, likely shock settling in. Earlier that day, I had stopped by the bank and reported the card stolen. Donald had taken my ATM card without permission, intending to claim the $500,000 I had earned for himself. His actions were clear theft, and filing a report was the right course of action. The ATM card he had could no longer access the funds. Moreover, our marriage was over, removing any claim he might have had as a spouse. How does it feel to be tricked by the woman you looked down upon? I couldn't help but add with a hint of satisfaction. I don't know what you wanted the $500,000 for, but I'm not foolish enough to hand over such an amount under these circumstances. I continued firmly, exhausted by his pleas. I need the $500,000 right now. Please, I'll do anything. Just give me the money. Donald pleaded desperately. His urgency was palpable, but I couldn't fathom why he suddenly needed such a large sum. Why do you suddenly need $500,000? What have you done? I asked, the ominous silence hanging heavy as I awaited his response. Donald began to explain. 2 days ago, upon learning about the $500,000, I impulsively quit my job, expecting a windfall. I spent a large portion on gambling, accumulating a debt of $300,000. No lenders were demanding repayment within a week, or his future was uncertain. Donald believed he could resolve everything with the ATM card linked to the $500,000. He continued living lavishly, assuming the funds were his. However, when he attempted to withdraw the money that evening, he discovered the card was useless. Now, without the $500,000, my future is uncertain, Donald admitted, his desperation evident. He had abandoned the divorce papers and shamelessly contacted me for help. I don't know what will happen if this continues. Donald's voice trembled with panic. and it seemed there was no falsehood in his story. His reckless actions elicited a deep sigh from me. Donald had done the unthinkable. Seduced by the allure of a large sum of money, he had recklessly spent $300,000 in just a few days. The old me, who had once tolerated his terrible behavior and modestly lived with Donald, might have extended a helping hand. But now I was a different person. There was no love left for Donald, and no matter how much he begged, I felt no pity, only a faint amusement that he thought I would care. Still, Donald hadn't given up. "Please help me. You're the only one I have left," he pleaded desperately. His appeals grated on my nerves. I wanted to rid myself of this nuisance and focus on my treatment. This was a situation of Donald's own making. If he had shown concern for me as a husband and brought my things on the day I asked, I might have considered sharing some of the $500,000 with him. But he had chosen otherwise. "I'm sorry, but I have no intention of giving you the $500,000 or helping you. It's your own responsibility," I replied firmly, my tone unyielding and harsh. After all this time of not behaving like a husband, it's cowardly to ask for help now, just because we're technically still married. Don't be so cruel. We were married after all. Our long relationship doesn't just disappear with a divorce paper. Donald tried to appeal to our past. "What relationship?" I retorted sharply. "You've only leaned on me. You're making excuses to manipulate the situation in your favor." I refused to waste another minute on him. "I will not give you the $500,000, no matter what you say." Donald's desperation escalated. "Please, Emily, I'm begging you. You're the only one I can turn to. If you abandon me, I don't know what will happen to me." His tone implied blame directed at me for his predicament. But it was Donald's reckless spending that had brought him to this point. If only he hadn't splurged so carelessly, he wouldn't be facing such a dire future. If he hadn't cut me off, thinking he had access to money, none of this would have happened. Stop making excuses. You're facing the consequences of your own actions. Handle it yourself. I told him firmly before ending the call. Ignoring several subsequent calls from Donald, I blocked his contact to ensure no further communication. With the divorce papers filed and submitted, Donald and I were officially strangers. Embracing my newfound freedom, I focused on battling cancer, which after a long struggle, I finally overcame. Upon discharge from the hospital, I learned from a friend that Donald's whereabouts had become unknown. Desperate after losing contact with me, he had tried to borrow money from his in-laws and friends. However, his urgent requests for $300,000 raised suspicions, and no one lent him a penny. Donald's fate remained a mystery to me, but it was clear he was enduring more suffering than he could have imagined. A sense of deep satisfaction washed over me. Post-cancer, I moved out of the house I had shared with Donald, found a new home, and began working from home, relishing my independence. Thankfully, my finances were secure. Occasionally asked by friends if I would find new love, memories of my tumultuous life with Donald discouraged any thoughts of remarriage. I preferred the freedom of living alone.